preparing for a successful transition webinar. My name is Joe and I am the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars. A couple of notes for all of you. All of our participants today are on mute, but we absolutely want to take your questions. Please utilize the question portion of the dashboard, and we will have a session at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. Please note that copies of today's presentation will be available for download shortly after we're finished. And also, this webinar and all other past PJR webinars is going to be available for reviewing on our website. If you look to the right, about 2/3 of the way down, you'll see a link entitled Previously Recorded Webinars, and therein you can view this webinar, including the question and answer session. Our topics for today: we're going to discuss a little bit about where the standards come from. We're going to review the changes and why they were so dramatic on this occasion. We're going to take a look at the timeline, which we're getting close to being to the end of. We'll have a look, an extended look at the key changes to the standard. We will review what I'm sure for many of you is a key question, that being, do you have to overhaul your system? We have an FAQ session from past presentations. Perhaps some of your questions will be answered there. A few final comments, and then your questions. Any standard that is written with an ISO prefix identifies it as a publication from the International Organization for Standardization. And the ISO, it's an international collective. They are based in Geneva, Switzerland, and their sole purpose is the authoring of international standards for a variety of purposes and applications. Now, each of those standards is assigned to a committee, and the committee that is specifically assigned to ISO 9001 is TC 176. Now, TC 176 itself also includes members from many of the major industrialized nations. The U.S. representatives are from ANSI, the American National Standards Institute. Now, as to why the changes were so dramatic with the 2015 standard, there's a few things that the ISO has specifically said about why they made such a change. First of all, the industries that use ISO 9001 have evolved and presumably will continue to evolve. So it was thought that the standard itself also had to evolve and meet the changing needs from those industries. There was obviously a desire to see ISO 9001 continue to grow. It is a very popular standard, but the ISO obviously would like to see it be even more popular and more utilized, particularly in service sectors. There was a targeted effort on this occasion to simplify some of the language that's used to try to promote consistent interpretations of the standard. And perhaps most importantly, there was a desire to improve the cross-compatibility between standards for those companies out there that want to have more than one certification, such as those that wish to have a 9001 and 14001 certification. At the time that the standard was being developed, the TC 176 chairperson, a gentleman by the name of Nigel Croft, was asked what are the key goals that the standard is trying to accomplish. And kind of speaking off the cuff, so to speak, he said that there were three key features, three key items that the committee wanted to achieve in the writing of the new standard. The first two of these are legacy ideas, and they happen to be linked ideas as well. The standard needs to continue to promote the process approach. The whole idea that things are systematic, that we are basing what we do on results, that processes are planned, that processes interact with each other, and so forth. Secondly, the cycle of plan, do, check, act. He emphasized at that time that this should exist at both the process and system level. One of the things that you will notice if you read the standard, the 2015 standard, and also the 9001-2008 standard in a certain way, is that the standard itself follows a plan, do, check, act cycle of sorts. So again, these are legacy ideas from past writings of the 9001 standard. The new idea, and I would qualify this as being really an evolving of an existing idea, is risk-based thinking, the whole aspect of preventing undesirable outcomes. And we're going to dig into risk-based thinking and risk a little bit later in my presentation, and we'll draw some parallels to some older requirements. Let's take a look now at the timeline for transition and get a sense of where we've been and where we're going. As I mentioned earlier, this transition timeline is nearing its completion. It goes back all the way to June of 2013 when we saw the publication of the committee draft. That was a relatively minimal distribution item. Pretty much just the committee members were the ones that were privy to it. In May of 2014, the ISO made the DIS, or Draft International Standard, available. There were actually some organizations at that time that purchased that document and began the process of implementing based on that document. That's a risky move to take, obviously, but it did turn out the DIS was roughly 90 to 95% of what became the finished standard. In July of 2015, we saw the final Draft International Standard, or FDIS, and that was followed shortly thereafter by the publication of the official certifiable ISO 9001-2015. That happened in September. Looking ahead, we have one last critical threshold to cross, and that is in September of 2018, when the ISO 9001-2008 standard is officially rendered as obsolete, and any client that wishes to have a viable ISO 9001 certification will have to have transferred to the new standard. ISO 9001-2015 was published on September 15th of 2015. It is available for purchase directly from the ISO itself. It represents the culmination of nearly 3.5 years of work, going all the way back to the issuance of Annex SL back in 2012. We're going to be digging into what that is in just a little bit. As I said, the clock is ticking on ISO 9001-2008. By virtue of that publication date for 9001-2015 of September 15th, the cutoff for 9001-2008 has been established as September 14th, 2018. PJR, for our part, we have established our cutoff as well on 9001-2008 auditing. That is found in the FAQ document, which can be downloaded from our website at www.pjr.com. Additionally, we do have a client memorandum available with some more specific details on this. If you're a current PJR client, you can request a copy of that memorandum from either your salesperson or your scheduler. Now, as to what are the key changes, ISO 9001-2015 is among the first of the ISO standards to make use of an item that is called Annex SL. Now, you may have heard of Annex SL being referred to as the high-level outline, HLO, Annex XL. So you're probably wondering, well, what is this thing? What is Annex SL? Well, Annex SL, as the name would imply, is an annex. It is an annex of a much larger ISO publication called ISO IEC Directives Part 1, Consolidated ISO Supplement Procedures Specific to ISO. This is a standard on how to write standards. It's a rule book that the ISO self-imposes and follows in the writing of its standards. It's actually freely available for public viewing. I've provided a link here that you can follow if you wish to read the content of Directives Part 1 and Annex SL specifically. Annex SL was written back in 2012, and it was written by a special committee called the Joint Technical Coordination Group. And you can think of Annex SL as a 10-section blueprint for authoring all of the ISO family of standards. What they do in Annex SL is they provide kind of the base language, the base verbiage. That verbiage has to appear in the ISO standards that are written now and updated now. And the intent is that this is going to promote utilization of common terms, core definitions, and so forth. Obviously, a number of these standards use the same terms over and over again. The term organization is used in every one of these standards. The term supplier is perhaps used. You would have a term like documented information. This is something that they want to see consistency between standards. Now their plan is for all of the ISO standards to be transitioned to the Annex SL structure by the end of next year. Now that's a very aggressive goal. It's probable that there's going to be some standards that will be pushed out beyond that, some of the less utilized standards perhaps. But certainly all of the major standards will have gone through this transition by then. And what this means is that if you are a company that wants to get additional certifications, the idea is that you should be able to do so with a single management system. If you want to pair 9001, 14001, and say 45001, if you want to have a quality management system, environmental management system, and a health and safety management system, you can pursue that and have a single set of manuals or a single set of controls that are put in place where there's common language, there's common verbiage, and it's less difficult for you to achieve multiple certifications. That was kind of the larger intent behind publishing Annex SL. Let's take a look now at the 10-section structure and get a sense of what's where, and again illustrate the whole idea of this Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle being represented by the standard itself. The first three sections are non-auditable. We're actually going to be exploring those a little bit later in the course. So let's pick up with Section 4, which is where the auditable content begins. Section 4 is called Context of the Organization, and there's a couple of real high-level items that are here and some linked ideas. What is the nature of this organization? Who are the interested parties? Define the scope. Define what the processes are. In Section 5, we have leadership and commitment. This is where we're establishing, among other things, our quality policy, defining roles and responsibilities within the management system. In Section 6, planning, we have our primary placeholder for the risk requirement. This is also where you will find quality objectives and planning of changes. Section 7 is called support, and there's a number of items here. We have competency here. We have a communication activities here. Section 7 is also where you'll find the calibration requirements. There's the new term documented information is found in Section 7. So if you take 4, 5, 6, and 7 together, think of those as the plan portion of Plan, Do, Check, Act. In turn, We look to Section 8. Section 8 is called Operation. And for the most part, what you find in Section 8 Operation is very similar to what existed in ISO 9001-2008 under Section 7 Product Realization. This is all of your day-to-day activities: selling your product, designing your product, interfaces with external providers, controlling production and service. This is the meat of the activities within your system. This is where your product is being realized. So think of Section 8 as the do portion in Plan, Do, Check, Act. The last two sections are performance evaluation, Section 9. This is obviously the check portion of Plan, Do, Check, Act. A lot of familiar items here. Inspection of product is here. Internal auditing is here. Management review is here. Customer satisfaction monitoring is here as well. And then the standard, the auditable portion of the standard concludes with Section 10, which is called improvement. Obviously this would be the ACT portion. And again, a lot of familiar content: continual improvement, nonconformity, corrective action, and so forth. Let's dig a little deeper now and explore the key changes and examine how these are going to impact your system and how these will be potentially looked at during the audit. Let's start with risk. Risk is obviously, for most people, the most, shall we say, stomach-churning aspect of the new standard. There are a number of articles that have been written on what they're going for with this requirement, and I've seen a lot of models on approaching risk management and things of this nature. So take it from the perspective of what's actually in the standard. First of all, the term risk is used a total of 16 times in the auditable portion of 9001-2015. And it's important to understand that it's not expected that you're going to have a formal or documented risk management process. In fact, I'm going to be pointing something out in just a bit where that is made official. The way that they want you to view this requirement is identification and management of risk needs to be a system-wide strategy. This is not a set of projects that you work on a few days a month. Risk-based thinking, which is the phrase that the committee itself really wants people to wrap their arms around, needs to be something that impacts all of your processes in much the same way that continual improvement was kind of the guiding principle back when 9001-2000 was published. Risk aversion is something that needs to impact all of the various areas of your system. Let's have a look now at the actual verbiage that is presented in Section 6, which, as I said, is the primary clause for things dealing with risk. Okay. When planning for the quality management system, the organization needs to consider the issues that are referred to in Section 4.1, that is both internal and external issues, and the requirements referred to in 4.2, those being requirements that come from internal and external interested parties, and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. Now, I want to emphasize the fact that the standard calls out risks and opportunities. This is actually something that's driven by Annex SL itself, this kind of duality of this activity. And so what are they going for with that? Well, again, there's a clue given in the bullets here. You have, first of all, enhancing desirable effects. You know, this activity, this forward-looking activity, is not just about preventing bad stuff. And obviously that's what's covered in subclause C, to prevent or reduce undesired effects. But let's look at this as not just avoiding bad stuff, but also what are the good things that we can take advantage of? What are the opportunities that we can look to enhance our system and achieve improvement and so forth? And overall, all of this needs to help us be assured that our system will achieve its intended results. Now this continues in section 612, where it goes on to say that the organization needs to plan actions to address those risks and opportunities. And there's some key verbiage here. How are we going to integrate those actions into quality management system processes? So again, you'll note that the emphasis here is this needs to be something that exists as part of your processes, not to have a separate risk management process. Now, if you as an organization feel that having a separate standalone risk management process is the right way to approach this, that's fine. But again, the idea is that risk-based thinking is a system-wide activity. It's something that impacts all of your processes. Now, looking to ISO 9001-2008, I'm sure most of you on the call today are coming from an organization that has a history of being 9001 certified under the 2008 version of the standard. And there are absolutely a number of activities required under ISO 9001-2008 that are going to help you demonstrate your compliance to risk management. Let's have a look at some of the more important ones. Section 5.6, Management Review. You're already assessing your overall quality system and targeting improvement efforts. That is risk-based thinking. 722, Review of Requirements related to the product. You're already expected to assess customer expectations against your current capabilities and take steps to resolve discrepancies. 622, Training. You're already assessing competency needs and taking steps to ensure that your personnel are competent. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, 8.5.3, Preventive Action. Assessing potential problems and taking actions to avoid those problems in the first place. Let's continue with some of the key changes in the standard. We'll have a look now at some key changes in terminology. The standard has eliminated the phrases procedure, record, and document. And all of these have been replaced with the phrase documented information. Now if we look at Annex A6, and we'll be pointing out the importance of the annexes in just a little bit, Annex A6 gives us an important clarification on this, and it points out the use of the term maintain and retain. Now, maintained documented information should be generally understood as a replacement for past references to document procedure, quality manual, and so forth. So these are things that you retain, or maintain rather, that are a functioning part of your system and are static. They are not records. These are more what we would formally refer to as documents, forms, procedures, and so forth. There's only a handful of these that are required by the standard. One good example is in section 4.3. There is a requirement that the scope of the quality management system be officially established and maintained as documented information. Now the phrase retained documented information is a replacement for all past references to records. Now obviously there's a number of these present in the standard, one example being 9.3.3, which requires that records of management review be retained. So again, when you're reading the standard, be on the lookout for the phrases maintained documented information and retained documented information. Another interesting change, all references to the term product now read as products and services. Now, actually, this was the intent for many years. If you read Clause 3 of ISO 9001-2008, it states, wherever the term product appears, it can also mean service. Now, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the standard wants to see a greater utilization of ISO 9001 by service sectors, and I think it's felt that by pushing the term service into the body of the standard itself, that's going to help make this standard a little more approachable for some of these service type companies. Management responsibility has become leadership. This is kind of pushing the idea that management leads by example and involvement rather than simply directing that activities are performed. Continual improvement is now part of a larger section known simply as improvement. The idea here is that continual improvement is not the only aspect of improvement that should be strived for in a quality system. We can have improvement by way of breakthroughs, reactive changes, reorganizations, and so forth. Suppliers are now going to be referred to as external providers, and again, the intent here is to better accommodate service organizations. The term external provider itself is actually given a bit of explanation in Annex A, subclause A8, where it indicates that that term should be thought of as a collective term for not just outside suppliers, but also associate companies and outsourcing. And the requirements that are given are intended to be universal for all of those types of companies. One of the more dramatic changes to the standard has been the elimination of some of the required content. 9001-2015 does not specifically require any of the following. Does not require a quality manual, it does not require any procedures, and it has eliminated all mention of work instructions. Now, for a number of companies, obviously there's a choice to be made. The intent here is that you need to have consistent and effective processes, and actually that was what was intended all along in 9001-2008, is that processes have to be consistent and processes have to be effective. Now, if that can be accomplished without procedures, we as auditors are supposed to have an open mind on what your methods have been to achieve consistent and effective processes. So we'll be looking at that a bit more later, but for now, bear in mind that they are no longer officially required. Another item that is no longer required is the designation of a management representative. There is no official mention of a management representative within the standard. Now, the implication here is not that the responsibilities have been eliminated, but that those functions, those tasks, should fall to top management, to leadership. Leadership needs to take, as the standard says, accountability for the effectiveness of their ISO 9001-2015 quality management system. Now, obviously, for a lot of organizations, it's helpful to appoint a key person, a key contact, a coordinator, if you will, and that's going to continue to be fine, but this is not the person that's going to just run the system by themselves, and for management to say, okay, this is all on you to run my system. That is going to no longer be acceptable. And really, there's only a finite number of companies that run their systems that way. The standard wants to be very clear that the leadership of the company needs to take the helm and needs to be fully responsible for the effectiveness of their quality system. The phrase permissible exclusions has also been removed from the standard. Organizations are now able to claim any item as non-applicable. This is a little bit of a change in that the entire standard is now up for grabs as far as being non-applicable. Now, our analysis has concluded that the only logical exemptions are going to be from sections 7 and 8. Anything else is going to bring into question the validity of the quality system. We are going to have to verify these designations at each and every audit. That's what we do right now anyway with permissible exclusions. Your method for documenting your non-applicable clauses does not have to be all that different from how it's done now for permissible exclusions. The standard has introduced a key term called interested parties. This is another item that's pushed by Annex SL itself. We actually have a definition for this term. Person or organization that can be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. Now that definition goes on to give some examples. These include customers, people within the organization, suppliers. Then it gives some more interesting examples: bankers, unions, partners, competitors. Now in clause 4.2, there's an important clarifier that's given, and that is that the organization needs to determine who their interested parties are, but these are to be interested parties that are relevant to the quality management system. And the organization has to be prepared to give some kind of explanation on relevancy. Now the idea is that interested party needs to broaden the scope of who impacts your system. In the past, obviously, there was a lot of emphasis on the role of the customer, and that hasn't changed. Customers are obviously hugely important in how you operate your quality system. But there's a larger picture, isn't there? That there's more going on that impacts your quality system than just customers. And this term is intended to kind of broaden that idea and draw some attention to these other people. Okay, we're going to do a section-by-section analysis now, and we're going to look at some of the key new questions that are posed by the standard. Section 4. What is the purpose of this organization? Who does it exist for? Who are the interested parties? Does any part of the standard qualify for a non-applicable designation? Section 5. Is there a leadership structure that's been established? Is leadership making itself accountable for the effectiveness of the system? Are the quality policy and objectives consistent with the strategic direction of the company? Is the quality policy available to all interested parties? Has the quality system been integrated into business processes? Now on that last one, please note that we are not going to be digging around in your financial records. There's been some cause for alarm on that particular point. I can assure you we will absolutely not be digging around in your ledgers and so forth. Section 6. Have we identified and considered risks and opportunities? Are we taking actions for said risks and opportunities? Looking at quality objectives, do we know who's going to be responsible for them? Do we have a target date? What is it we're trying to accomplish with these objectives? And are the objectives relevant to the conformity of products, and do they enhance customer satisfaction? Section 7 really only presents one key new idea, and that is organizational knowledge. Now organizational knowledge is knowledge that's gained by experience. You need to have a mechanism in place to retain organizational knowledge. And furthermore, have you considered changing needs and trends against your current competency base and determined what you're going to need for the future? Section 8 actually has no significant new content that was not present in some form in ISO 9001-2008. That's also the case for Section 9, although it's important to point out that Section 9 is the new placeholder for management review, properly identifying it as part of the check cycle in Plan Do Check Act. And finally, Section 10. Again, no significant new content that was not present in some form in ISO 9001-2008. Now hopefully what we're going away from this examination with is a sense that the changes to the standard taken in total are minimal and they're quite manageable. Even risk is not such a new idea if you consider the fact that preventive action has been part of the 9001 standard since it was first published. What we're going to do now is a cover-to-cover analysis of the standard. I want to give you a sense of what's where and kind of how to navigate the standard once you purchase your copy of it. Now the standard begins with section 0.1, which is called General. It gives an overview statement, some discussion on who the standard benefits, discussion on risk-based thinking, the Plan Do Check Act cycle is discussed, and it gives the official definitions for 4 key terms that are used in these standards. Now again, this is Annex SL content at play here. The first of these is shall, and obviously shall is a legacy term that's been used for many years in the standards. It indicates a mandatory requirement. Should represents a recommendation. For ISO 9001, there's actually no uses of the term should within the auditable content. May, this is a permission statement. It appears actually once in the standard in section 4.3, and can, a possibility or capability. There are numerous instances of the term can within the auditable portion. In section 0.2, we're given a listing of the 7 quality management principles. Now these are actually given a much more thorough discussion in the ISO 9000 standard. ISO 9000, of course, being the fundamentals and vocabulary document. Now you may note that these 7 quality management principles are very similar to the 8 quality management principles that we had under ISO 9001-2008. In fact, what the 7 quality management principles here did essentially was retain those items and combine 2 of them. And the 2 that were combined became evidence-based decision-making. But all of the familiar items are here. Customer focus, leadership, improvement, and so forth. In section 0.3, there's a reinforcement of the importance of the process approach. There's actually a graphic that's given that aligns the PDCA cycle with the sections of the standard and kind of shows the Plan Do Check Act cycle as it's presented by the clauses. Section 033 is actually an additional discussion of risk-based thinking. There's one more critical section for that coming. In section 0.4, we have an expressed relationship given between ISO 9001 and the support standards 9000 and 9004. That's actually something else that'll be repeated later. And then we hit sections 1, 2, and 3. And as promised earlier, here is our deeper exploration of these 3 sections. Section 1 is called Scope, and it is some general verbiage specifically for the applicability of ISO 9001. In Section 2, we have a reference, a normative reference made to ISO 9000 for all official terms and definitions. Section 3 is called Terms and Definitions, but at the moment it is without content. It's possible that Section 3 will be used as a future placeholder for 9001 specific definitions, but at the moment it is without content. We've already reviewed sections 4 through 10, so let's continue with the annexes that follow. And I want to place a lot of emphasis on the importance of Annex A. Annex A is called informative, and there are 8 subclauses in here. And there's a lot of really helpful, plain-spoken information that's given in these 8 clauses. Let's go through these one by one. Annex A1 is called Structure and Terminology. And what this section does is it reinforces the idea that if you as an organization want to achieve ISO 9001:2015, you do not have to have documentation that was written to align with it. You don't have to number your procedures so that they match the standard. You don't have to use the terminology from the standard. So for example, if you want to refer to them as suppliers, there's no reason that you have to start referring to them as external providers just because that's what the standard calls them now. This clause obviously is intended to accommodate those companies that are transitioning, and they want the transition to be as smooth as it can possibly be, and this is part of that. Annex A2, products and services. This gives us a fuller explanation of the intent in changing all the references of product to read products and services. In Annex A3, we have a discussion on interested parties and who those interested parties might be. We actually looked at some of this a bit earlier. Annex A4 is the very helpful section dedicated to risk-based thinking. It's extensive, and this is where it is officially established that you do not have to have a formal structure or process. It's written right into the standards. So if you're ever given a finding that says you don't have a formal risk management or risk-based thinking process, you can absolutely point to Annex A4 and say, look, it's not required. In Annex A5, we have some discussion on why the term exclusions was removed and the new idea of non-applicables. A6 we looked at a bit earlier, the whole aspect of mandatory documented information that is both maintained and then retained and what those terms mean. In section A7 we have some discussion on organizational knowledge and what does that term mean, and how does a company face its competency challenges. And then finally, A8, what do we mean by external providers and who does that term apply to? Annex B is an discussion on the relationship between ISO 9001 and various other ISO publications. And finally, we have a bibliography. Now, as to whether or not you have to overhaul your current system, the answer to that is absolutely not. One of the goals of the TC 176 committee was to see a greater utilization of ISO 9001 and to improve its inclusiveness. Now, had they told the over 1 million worldwide registered companies that they had to overhaul their system, that's inconsistent with that goal. So what does this mean in practical terms? Well, the functioning pieces of your quality system, if they are working for you, you can absolutely keep them the way they are. If you like your quality manual, if you like your procedures, if you have controls in place for your processes that are working, you can keep those things. If your quality policy is known, if your objectives are effective, these are all things that you can hang on to and have be effective with absolutely no problem whatsoever. Let's have a look now at some FAQs from past presentations and the answers to those questions. Will our staff have to complete transition training? This will be dependent on the extent of revisions that you make to your system, but you are going to be expected to provide some form of transition training to your staff. At minimum, we would expect that awareness training needs to be provided, and you need to assess how the new standard impacts your various processes and personnel. Now, obviously, it's entirely conceivable that the majority of your staff is going to feel no effect in your transition to ISO 9001-2015. What about internal auditors? Do they have to complete transition training? Remember that internal auditing is viewed in the same light as any other competency within a quality management system. Namely, you as the organization are responsible for determining what it means to be competent as an internal auditor and what the methods are going to be to achieve said competency. You'll have to decide for yourself how extensive the transition training needs to be. Now, if you have a seasoned team of internal auditors, folks that have been auditing your system for many years, they know your processes well, they know your documentation well, it's absolutely conceivable that those folks could have a period of self-study on the new standard and be ready to transition to auditing the new standard. Obviously, from our vantage point as a certification body, we will judge the effectiveness of your transition training efforts by the overall effectiveness of your internal audit process. Will the other standards be updated as well? All of the major sector-specific standards, these would include TS 16949 and AS 9100. They've all indicated that they're going to continue to align with ISO 9001. TS 16949 and AS 9100 are both expected to be published before year's end in their updated state. In both cases, we know that they are getting close, although we don't have firm dates just yet. TL 9000 2016 was published back in July. It is to be considered effective this month, September 2016. We actually will be giving separate webinars on TL 9000. The only major standard that we're aware of that is not planning to continue its alignment to 9001 is ISO 13485. ISO 13485 2016 was written and published in March of 2016, and it was written to align with ISO 9001-2008. We will be providing some further updates on ISO 13485 2016 soon, so please keep an eye on our website for that. Should we get certified now or wait? There are some companies out there, perhaps some of them are on the call today, where they have been implementing a new quality management system. And the effort has been long enough that they did it under ISO 9001-2008. And you're wondering, well, should we still certify to that standard? Well, first of all, bear in mind that you still have about 2 years of usability left in ISO 9001-2008. Additionally, remember that ISO 9001-2015 is still a very new standard. Even though it's about a year old at this point, in terms of utilization and auditors getting comfortable with it, we're still in a transitional phase ourselves. So if you want to put off being compliant to 9001-2015, there is certainly no harm in doing so. What transition steps can we take right now? Well, for this, I like to always point out the IAF publication ID 9. IAF, you may be aware, is kind of the top of the line in terms of enforcement of the standards. They're kind of a partner company to the ISO. They recommend a 7-point approach in doing your transition. First, purchasing the standard and reviewing the standard, having the leadership team go through it cover to cover and identify the gaps that need to be addressed. Secondly, writing up a plan of implementation for those gaps, including assigned responsibilities. Third, update of all documents, including your quality and procedures manual, if you're planning to retain them, to reflect any new or revised processes. Having awareness and transition training for your staff on the new standard and the changes to your system. A full system internal audit followed by a management review, and corrective actions in place for all internal audit findings. Finally, coordination with PJR for planning of your transition arrangements. I want to emphasize this point just once more. Bear in mind that your quality manual, your procedures, etc., they've got to work for you first and foremost. These are not documents that should be thought of as existing to serve the audit. They need to serve your quality management system. And so if renumbering them helps them work better for you, if changing the terms that are used helps them work better for you, absolutely do so, but that will not be required. I'd like to encourage you to also work with your auditor. For many of you, your auditors have been coming to see you for many years. They know your systems well, and they will be able to provide you with invaluable help in making sure that the transition goes smoothly. We feel this is an exciting time for quality system certification. The 2015 standard is a beneficial update to a standard that has a long track record of contribution. PJR is going to continue to provide timely updates on this transition process, and we will endeavor to enable our clients as smooth a transition as possible. Let's take a quick look at what's going on with the support standards. ISO 9000, as I mentioned, was also updated in 2015. That is the fundamentals and vocabulary document. It contains all sanction definitions, the 7 quality management principles, and a series of concept diagrams showing the intended interrelationship of ideas. As before, 9000 is not a certifiable standard. It is a reference help standard. 9004 and 19011 both remain at their current revisions for now. It is an assured, it has been assured that ISO 9004 will be updated. We don't know just when. 19011, I would say, is a bit more in the air at this moment in terms of whether or not it receives an update, but presumably it will as well. We have prepared 2 reports that we feel will be beneficial to our clients. First, we have a side-by-side comparison between ISO 9001-2008 and ISO 9001-2015. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have an FAQ report highlighting key questions and answers. Both of these are available on our website, www.pjr.com. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of my other webinars. I have ISO 9001-2015, Critical Points of Review During the Transition Audit Process. This is a deep dive into the new areas represented by the standard and how they'll be looked at during the transition audit. That presentation is given every other month. Interaction of processes and its importance to a successful audit. It's an exploration of the critical topic of processes and how to correctly understand them, also given every other month. And what to expect during your Stage 1 audit. This is intended to help you prepare for your first official assessment by a certification body, also given every other month. I'd like to invite you to opt in so that you can be kept informed of the latest news automatically. If you visit our website and go to the bottom of the home page, you'll note there's a space for you to enter your email address and click subscribe. I do thank you for your time today, At this time, I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question dashboard and see if we have any questions today. Okay, we've got a series of questions from Jennifer Bills. Don't we have to show proof that risk-based thinking is being done? Doesn't it have to be measured and analyzed? Jennifer, you have to be able to show that it's been integrated as part of your quality management system. Now, in terms of something tangible, one of the areas that the standard requires examination of risk activity is within management review. It's actually one of the required agenda items. So, yes, you do have to show it in that context, but they are trying to be careful about being too prescriptive on the correct approach. Jennifer Bills also asks, in doing the internal audit, should we audit to ISO 9001, 2008 and add new requirements that come from 9001, 2015? Jennifer, I think the proper way to look at this as is it's a new standard. It's still auditing your existing processes, but to a new set of requirements. We need to kind of cut the cord on 9001, 2008. Also, Jennifer wants to know what is the drop dead date to become ISO 9001 2015 certified. In terms of the official timing on that, I would direct you to obtain a copy of the client memo from either your scheduler or your salesperson. But the 9001 2008 standard will be rendered obsolete in September of 2018. Amilcar Incomino, I do hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, how do you document a process without a procedure? Well, it's an interesting question, and I would say to you, do you have to document your process? Do you have to have an official rendering of what your process is? There are multiple ways to control a process. For example, if you have a manufacturing process, you think about the various ways that companies control how a product is manufactured. Some companies use work instructions. Some companies use sample parts. Some companies use computer programs. Some companies utilize master samples and so forth. That attitude is being taken in a much larger sense with the balance of the standard, the whole idea that there's a lot of ways to accomplish control of a process. Matt Kroll asks, can you give an example of how an auditor would evaluate risk-based thinking as part of the quality system? We have instructed our auditors to ask the question in a very open sense. How have you incorporated risk-based thinking into your quality system? We've actually written that question right into our audit report. So the auditors have been instructed to take a very open mind in assessing the requirement, but you can absolutely expect that the question will be asked. And again, we'll be looking in some of the areas where it's required, such as management review. Kira Harris asks, can you have more than one subscriber from an organization? Kira, I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to. If you're asking, can you have more than one interested party? Absolutely. You can absolutely have multiple and should have multiple interested parties. Narelle Sheth asks, is the internal auditor able to officially train other team members to become internal auditors? Narelle, again, in terms of what an organization does to assure that its staff is competent, that is going to be up to the organization, and it will be subject to verification of effectiveness during the transition audit. Matt Kroll asked, what kind of evidence might the auditor expect? Well, again, it's not a case of we expect something specific. We're asking an open-ended question, and we're going to listen to what you say in terms of how you have approached it. Kira Harris asks, does PJR provide training on preventive action awareness? Not presently. There is guidance on preventive action available in other realms. There's been a number of articles written about it. Jennifer Bills asked, do we have to change our quality policy and objectives? Potentially, but probably not. Bear in mind that the quality policy requirement is virtually the same. The only changes are that it has to be relevant to your strategic direction and it has to be available to interested parties. As far as objectives are concerned, again, probably not. The emphasis here is that they have to be relevant to customer satisfaction and product realization. So for most companies, that's already being done by their existing policy and objectives. Any further questions? Okay, well that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you and have a good day.